Hey everyone, it's that guy in Hutch, and you're listening to That Podcast in Hutch. Back in January, everyone was kind of doing this dry January. Not everyone, but a lot of people that I talked to were doing that, and kind of gave me an idea and had some conversations around that with people. And it made me want to do a series of episodes about addiction and focusing more on alcoholism. And part of this came out of a conversation I was having with my friend, Steve Becker, at breakfast. And we just started talking again about some of his experiences as a recovering alcoholic and his journey and what that's looked like. So that kind of triggered the next 3 episodes that we're going to present to you that are looking at alcoholism. The first episode, I talked with my friend Steve Becker, and he spent most of his career as a district court judge here in Reno County and later served in the Kansas legislature. And he's been a longtime friend of mine, and I'm very grateful for that, and also grateful for his willingness to talk with me very openly about the struggles he's had with alcohol and his path to recovery. It was a very hard road for him to beat that back, but he's successfully done it for a very long time. But as you listen to him talk, you'll remember that the world really is one day at a time, especially when you're recovering from any sort of substance misuse. The next person I talked to then was Cammie and Michael Rumbach, and I wanted to talk with them because I had kind of watched their journey from afar, and I saw that Michael had given up drinking beer and given up alcohol, and saw him kind of talk about the way it had changed his life. He started riding his bike. He was losing a bunch of weight, and it just made me curious. So when this came up and I had an opportunity to talk with him, I wanted to get him in here. And they both came in here and were very candid about, Mike was very candid about his experience with alcohol and the way he tried to hide his alcoholism from his family. And then Cammie was very forthcoming about the toll that it took on their family and some of her experience in having a husband or someone in the family who was an alcoholic and trying to deal with that part of it. And this was to me, it was a very touching and very compelling episode, and one that I think you'll all get a lot of good information and good understanding out of. It's not an easy journey for anyone who's dealing with addiction, but it's also very, very hard for the people who don't have the addiction but love somebody with an addiction. The last episode that we recorded was with Seth Dewey, who formerly was the health educator at Reno County Health Department, who's now moved on to Mirror and continues his work with substance misuse and helping people with addiction and moving into recovery. He's been a great resource for our community and for the state, frankly. And he is himself a recovering addict who has worked in this health space in the public sphere and in the counseling area. And he's been a great resource in helping others understand the cause and the social cost of addiction. And he's a strong advocate for harm reduction policies, and he has helped elevate my understanding and compassion for the recovery community. And in this, we normally when I talk with Seth, we're talking about substances like fentanyl and methamphetamines and some of your illicit street drugs. But we have a very interesting conversation that kind of draws some parallels between those and alcoholism and the way that we treat those differently socially and in our communities. So I think you'll find this series thought-provoking and insightful. It certainly was for me. And here's my friend, Stephen Becker. So I kind of wanted to do this because we've had this conversation a couple of times about your history with sobriety and alcoholism. And I've always found it fascinating. And one of the things that has always struck me is how you talk about your time in treatment when you were inpatient and how you had to come to some realizations about yourself there. But before we get to that point, can we talk about what was going on in your life, or generally, I guess, what led you to that point?
I think that's the important thing is to, for someone to understand the point that you're referring to, you kind of need to do the lead into it and stuff.
So you grew up in Buhler.
I did, on the family farm right outside of Buhler. We were, I think, a conservative family. I had both parents and an older sister, so it was the four of us. The most important thing in our family was our faith, our church. Mm-hmm. I think my father held probably every office there was in our church, and we were pretty much centered around the church, I think. Mm-hmm. It was important to our family. And I look at my upbringing and things I was taught, and it was very traditional, I think. And I hear stories from other people in recovery, and sometimes they come from such dysfunction mm-hmm. that you can almost understand, well, no wonder you ended up like that. But that's not me. It was a very loving household, no dysfunction. And I was taught, I was taught those core values, It was a very loving atmosphere. And I was taught to be trustworthy and kind and all those good things, No dysfunction. Yeah, and I was in the public school systems there in Buhler. High school was okay for me. I didn't drink during high school. Some of my classmates did, I know, but I didn't. And I was in high school. I was somewhat socially awkward, and that bothered me somewhat. I wasn't a loner. Yeah. I had friends, but still, I always had issues, and I still do. I still do approaching people and engaging in conversation. That's still difficult for me to do. But anyway, yeah. And
well, and you have some anxiety too. There's little things that we were talking about before recording about, like clicking the pin, or you were wanting to kind of play with the mic cord.
Fiddle with the microphone, sure.
And that's a little bit of anxiety, isn't it?
Yeah, but I don't recall any of that when I was younger, in my youth. I don't think that was in my youth. But this is where I think it's somewhat unique. I can pinpoint the day everything changed. I graduated after my high school graduation the following morning, and I think I was up all night, graduation night, and then early in the morning I left for my summer job, which was with a custom harvesting crew. Mm-hmm. I'd never been away from home without my parents before. This was something brand new. And at that time, when I just threw away those values that I'd been taught, and I don't know why. Why would I do that, Jason? Why? The first day, on my way to the job, I bought a pack of cigarettes.
Really?
I didn't smoke, but yeah, it was something I shouldn't have done, and that's why I did it. Because now I didn't have to follow that rule anymore.
Yeah.
I was away from home.
Yeah.
So that I can see how that's how it started. I pushed away for some unknown reason, I pushed away those things I was taught and thought, this is brand new. This is freedom. I get to do whatever I want. Mm-hmm. It was kind of that attitude.
Yeah.
Because I wasn't living in my parents' house anymore.
And at that point, up to that point, you had just known one way of life, really. And you'd.
Yeah. I hadn't ever been out in in the world.
Yeah.
You know. So I don't know why that happened.
Well, so
and God, I'm paying the ultimate price now for that first pack of cigarettes.
How so?
God, because I smoked for 47 years,
yeah,
I think.
Yeah.
And
It still affects you having smoked that long?
No, it's cancer.
Oh, yeah.
The cancer is directly related to my smoking. So, yeah, that's a huge price to pay. But anyway, it was that summer that I left home for the first time. And I was working with a crew of young guys like me. And again, I was socially awkward. I wanted to be one of the guys, and I didn't feel like I fit in and stuff like that. And it was during that summer that I experienced my first drunk. I drank, and I got drunk. Mm-hmm. And it was an aha moment for me, Jason. I loved it.
Really?
And all of a sudden, my coworkers, were slapping me on the back and good old boy stuff.
Yeah.
And it was the answer.
Is that what it was?
I thought to myself, is this is the answer?
So all of that social awkwardness and everything, right?
I had conquered it.
Yeah. Through drinking.
I didn't.
Through drinking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like I've heard many times, drinking wasn't a problem. It was my solution to everything.
Yeah.
So anyway, and that was my first experience with that was extremely positive.
Yeah.
I loved it. It was, the clouds opened up and it said, Steve, this is the way.
Yeah.
And so shortly thereafter, the summer's over, I start college, and that's all I wanted to do.
And that's at KU,
right?
It's
party.
Did you go to KU?
No, I went to Hutch Junior College.
Okay, here in town. And all you wanted to do was party?
No, but Jason, nobody told me it was a 2-year curriculum. I made a career out of junior college. Because all I wanted to do was party.
Yeah.
And I did. I mean, there was a club called the Fireside on East 30th.
Uh-huh.
And I would party there Wednesdays, Fridays, and Saturdays and close the place down every time.
Yeah.
I remember one time I went there with some of my friends that I made in college, and we were sitting there, and pretty soon they got up to leave. And I said, where are you guys going? And one of them said, well, I got homework. And you got to be kidding me.
Yeah.
You're going to go home and do homework when we're having this much fun.
Yeah.
Yeah. I stayed, man.
And how long did that go on? You said you went to junior college, you went to HCC for a number of years.
I graduated I got a degree out of junior college, an associate degree. And then I went to Washburn University in Topeka. And somehow I made good grades. I drank a lot on the weekends. Mm-hmm. I think my pattern there became, I had a job the whole time I was going to school, and the pattern came: work hard, do what you need to do, and let go on the weekends. So that's kind of what I did, and I did good. I did good the last there an undergraduate, and I was successful in getting into Washburn University School of Law, despite my junior college transcripts. Oh gosh, they were horrible. But yeah, and then I did okay in law school. I graduated, and I didn't look to go anywhere except back home.
Okay.
That was the only thing I even considered. I didn't look for jobs elsewhere. I knew I needed to come back home because the roots apparently were so deep from my family.
Yeah.
That's what I threw away what I mentioned earlier. I threw away the stuff I learned from my family, but not the roots, man. Yeah. Anyway, I had to come back for some reason. And I got a job with a local attorney.
What year was that? What year did you come back to Hutch?
What year?
School? Yeah, what year?
I graduated law school in 1975.
Okay. And then came right back to Hutch after that. And you worked as in private law for
private
a while?
Law, yeah. Just had a private law practice. I didn't enjoy it very much. I didn't feel confident, advising some of my clients on issues that I wasn't confident about, and that made me feel somewhat ill at ease. But anyway, I didn't, because of that, I didn't enjoy it a lot. But anyway, I practiced law for about 5.5 years, and then everything changed. There became a vacancy in the district court here in Reno County because one of the judges was removed by the Supreme Court for misconduct. And that was a dramatic event. I mean, that's a whole story that is well known throughout the legal community. But a vacancy came up, and I submitted my name along with quite a few others. I think there were 7 of us that submitted our names for that position. And we met with the Reno County Judicial Nominating Commission, which was made up of people who resided in Reno County. And they sent my name to the governor, and along with another one. And I was appointed, 1981. I was appointed to the district court.
And you did that until your retirement, didn't you? You did that. I
did that for 26 years.
Yeah.
I was appointed to the bench when I was 33. Man, I was green. I was naive. I was in awe of that position. I was so in awe of that position that this was my rule. Steve, in this job, what you're doing now, there is zero room for error, zero tolerance for mistakes. Yeah, I adopted that. And of course, that was unrealistic.
Yeah.
I was so in this pursuit of perfection, and it's not realistic. I'd make mistakes. And I beat myself up about it. And God, as I say it, I'm still doing that, but I'm still doing that. But back then I could drown it would have a terrible taste in my mouth and I would feel bad. So I'd drown all that stuff. And it worked. It worked, man.
You could do that. You could take all that pressure of being perfect, of feeling that you've got to do this job with zero room for error, but you could drink that away at the end of the day. And even if you did make mistakes, just forget about it. Is that kind of how you coped with the stress
Yeah,
of the job?
and it was somewhere, as I explained earlier, I can pinpoint the time when all this started, but I can't pinpoint the time when it started to turn dark.
Yeah.
When it was no longer fun, when I couldn't find that buzz that I loved so much. And I thought, well, must be because I'm not drinking enough. Yeah. Yeah.
So you drink more then?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Of course. And I started drinking at home. I didn't go to bars I certainly went to bars, but when it started to turn dark, I didn't go to bars. I'd just stay at home. And I'd try to hide my drinking from my family. When they knew how much I drank, they knew it. I'd been open about it. And now all of a sudden I felt the need to hide it. I think that's the beginning of this whole shame thing.
Were you married at the time?
I was.
Okay. And were you hiding it from her?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I hadn't been, but then I started. I had a stepson, so I didn't want him to see me drinking all the time.
Yeah.
And it got to the point where this job I had, this thing about being a district court judge, I don't know if I can say it took me to this place or maybe I allowed myself to go to this place, but this little socially awkward Kansas farm boy had a pretty damn important job.
Mm-hmm.
I think the best way to describe it, I got way too big.
Mm-hmm.
I did. I started to feel, overly important, entitled. I got too big. I've heard it described as being like yeast.
Like yeast?
It makes the bread rise. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it made me just much bigger than I was. And I bought into all that. Not good. Not good, man.
So you had that going on and alcoholism at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah.
So on one hand, you feel really big about yourself because you're doing this job and then you're like, I'm somebody. On the other hand, you know internally that you're hiding this drinking. How does that conflict play out?
Yeah. There was a time, Jason, I was all that.
Yeah.
I was all that,
Well, let's talk about this for a minute, because this is true. And there was a time, and I don't know if it was this time in your life, but you ran marathons while you were smoking and drinking, right? You biked all over the place. You told me a story about how you'd get done running a marathon and then you'd go grab a cigarette right after you were done.
I'd have to find a place to hide, Jason. All my co-runners were standing around the finish line, and I was dying for a smoke because running a marathon is the longest time I would go without a cigarette.
Yeah.
I mean, so when I finished the marathon, and I'd have to try to find a place to hide where I could smoke where nobody would see me. I was wearing my marathon number across my chest and smoking one down. That was crazy. That was crazy, man. Yeah, I loved running.
Yeah.
I loved running. It was a good outlet for me.
Yeah.
I ran all the time. And, I did a lot of biking. Wow. I can hardly climb steps now, but
at that time you were all that, like you say.
I was all that.
All that. Yeah.
My workload got to a point where it was overwhelming. I wasn't managing my workload. My personal life was crazy. I'd done some shameful things in my personal life. my wife and I started some marriage counseling. And at one of the sessions, things just got a little bit crazy, and I had an anxiety attack. I didn't know what they were.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I would have anxiety attacks, but didn't know what they were.
Yeah.
They were horrible, just horrible. And the marriage counselor said, Steve, I don't think you're managing your life very well. And I think you need to get out of everything you're in. Get away from everything you're in. And you just need let's figure out what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, well, I first said, there's no way I can get away from my job. There's no way. But that sounded so appealing to me, where I could just get away from everything for a while.
Yeah.
So I said, let's do it. And what we're talking about is inpatient. And so, yeah, that kind of takes me to where you first started this out.
So this is where you end up in inpatient. What year was that?
1990.
Okay.
Spring of 1990. And as I understand it, my diagnosis going into inpatient treatment was chronic depression and acute anxiety. We hadn't defined any alcoholism.
Mm-hmm.
So I wasn't going in there for alcohol treatment.
Yeah.
Let's fix it. So, and my first meeting with the psychiatrist who kind of ran the facility, my first interview, I guess it was a intake. At one point, he asked me about my drinking, and my response was, my drinking's got nothing to do with this, doctor. Let's fix this depression and my anxiety. That I'm here to fix this. And when I feel stronger, I'll address my drinking.
Yeah.
I had the treatment plan.
Yeah, you knew what was going on.
I knew what I needed.
You'd been managing things so well up to this
point, yeah.
Too,
I mean, yeah. How'd that been working out for you? Yeah. No. Oh my gosh. And his response was, how about this, Steve? We get your brain out of that alcoholic fog, and when it clears up, then we look at your depression and your anxiety. Well, I guess that does make sense. He asked me, when was your last drink? And I said, while I was driving over here. I figured you wouldn't be serving. So, yeah, I was drinking as I'm checking myself in, sure.
Yeah.
But, yeah, it was okay. I liked it. I liked where I was being in there because it was all about me.
Yeah.
That was kind of cool.
Yeah.
Because I like it when
things are about
it's
you.
all about me. Because I'm all that. So, yeah, I had some interesting stuff, and I've told you the story before, but at one point early, maybe the first day, maybe the second day I was there, I'm in my room, my hospital room. I don't know, just hanging out, I guess. And a staff member comes to the door, stands in the doorway, and says, "It's time for crafts." And I chuckled, as you just did. And I said, "No, thank you. No, thank you. I don't do I don't do crafts." And she said, "It's time for crafts." And in my head, Jason, I'm going, "Oh my gosh, sweetie, you don't know who I am.
Uh-huh.
You don't know who I am.
Yeah.
You haven't seen my office, have you?
Yeah.
with all these degrees and decrees
and all these big things
framed and everything, and among them is hanging this black robe of authority.
Mm-hmm.
And when I go into a courtroom, everybody stands up. And I sit higher than anyone else in the courtroom, so everybody has to look up at me.
Mm-hmm.
And you're telling me, and I knew, I knew she didn't know that I was all that and who I was, because she would have prefaced her comment with all due respect, Your Honor, it's time for crafts. Yeah, let that sink in for a minute. And it's funny. I like to tell the story because I think it's a funny story, but that was the point. I recognized like that all my decisions throughout my adulthood
mm-hmm.
had led me to it's time for crafts.
Mm-hmm.
Everything I had done had brought me to that moment.
Yeah.
And at that time, I shed all that entitlement and all that arrogance and all that thinking I'm so special and so unique. And in recovery, we all often talk about just surrender. You got to quit fighting and just surrender because you've lost the battle.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I tried to quit drinking, but no, I couldn't quit drinking on my own.
Yeah.
But I tried, and I would pray and make deals. I would make deals, try to make deals. So you got to reach a point. You got to reach a point where you let all that go. You're beat, and you have to surrender. And that was my point right there.
Right there.
Right there. When they tell me it's time for crafts, yeah, war's over.
Yeah. You don't have much.
Battle's over, man.
Yeah, you don't have much to hold on to at that point.
No,
right?
no, there's no. So of course I went to crafts. I don't know how long I was in inpatient treatment. It wasn't like a 30-day alcohol thing. It was just to identify my issues. And while I was there, we identified my primary issue of alcohol.
Yeah.
So then I was discharged to an outpatient program and for alcoholism. And I kept going to that for a long time. I mean, I'm sure there was at some point where, okay, you've completed your treatment, but I wanted more. I wanted more. So I'd keep going.
And you went to meetings for a long time.
Yeah.
After, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Still do.
Yeah.
Regularly. Yeah. There was one other quick little anecdote in outpatient treatment. Before I was in inpatient treatment, people would they would see something was wrong with me, and they would ask me, "What's wrong, man?" Because I was in this dark mode, I had some suicidal ideations and stuff, and they, "What's wrong, Steve?" And I would say, this was my pat response, "You wouldn't understand," because I really couldn't identify it.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't explain it to someone when they say, "What's going on?" I couldn't explain it. And I was in outpatient treatment, and I was trying to explain it to my counselor about my work, how important my work was, and there was no room for mistake. And he said, "My God, you've been carrying a big load on your shoulders." And I'm like, finally somebody gets it.
Yeah.
Finally, someone understands the load I have on my shoulder, because I had to be perfect at what I did. But he followed that up. I thought I had found someone I could relate to, and he followed up that, "Man, you carry a heavy burden on your shoulders, you being the second coming and all." That's what he said. That's what he said. It was like, who do you think you are? Yeah. That's how I thought it was something admirable to be that demanding of myself in my job. But it was ego. It was all ego, Jason. And I've discovered, okay, looking at the big picture of my recovery and everything, every single issue that I come up with now in sobriety is ego versus humility. I have to be really careful about feeding my ego. I'll get too big again.
Yeah.
I'll get too big, and I can't allow that to happen, which is why I was hesitant to do what I'm doing right now. Because, come on, you asked me to be on your podcast, that feeds my ego. It does. It does. I'm important enough to be on Jason's podcast. I got to be careful, man.
But you've worked.
Because I know where
you've been. You know where you've been.
Exactly.
And where it's taken you.
I know where it will take me if I allow it to happen.
Yeah.
Yeah. So now I don't even want to be all that anymore.
Yeah. Do you have a process for balancing that? For checking your ego?
Yeah, I don't know if it's a process, it's just awareness. I'm always aware of that.
Yeah.
And that's what I think about. Once in a while, something will happen and I'll get my ego stroked. Somebody will say, "Man, I sure wish you were back in the legislature." Come on, Jason, you got to admit, the legislature strokes one's ego.
Absolutely. It too is a dangerous thing.
It is.
Because it does do that. And people get their identities wrapped up into that. And I have too before, where who am I going to be without this? Right? If I don't do this very important thing, who am I really?
And what I noticed in the legislature in this same line was when one of my colleagues was appointed chairman of a committee, almost every one of them, they kind of forgot where they came from. Now their only concern was doing what the speaker says. And they forgot we used to, work on issues and stuff together, but now, no, you're just obliged to the speaker for appointing you chairman. And they forget where they came from. Huh. Yeah.
Well, it's, I like what you were saying about your roots and at home, because the thing that always helps me remember and ground myself is coming back home and being home and being with the people that made you, right?
Yeah, being in that environment.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I know people in society are very mobile. I mean, move all over the country. I haven't. I still live at the same address where I was born, and the roots are pretty deep. But yeah, one of the things that gives me, I don't know, gives me strength. Sometimes I think it becomes very clear when you watch Gone with the Wind. Mm-hmm. She looked to Tara for strength. Yeah. And sometimes I find that when I'm home, I've got nothing to do, or I choose a time to do nothing. Let's put it that way. And I can just feel being at home. It heals me, I guess. Yeah. It heals me. That's what it does.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah.
So a couple of things I want to kind of circle back around to. You get out of recovery, you do outpatient, and then you go back to work. You go back to the bench. You were out, you said not quite a month, but I imagine you went straight back to work. But then you had to manage this new sobriety, but still do this work that you had been doing. Can you talk about how that was? Because talk about recognizing the ego part of this, but then you go right back into this very big job, and you're trying to manage sobriety. Was that a challenge?
Yeah, but I learned things early in sobriety, and I continue to learn these things throughout sobriety, that there's things I've been taught, whether it's been through a formal treatment program or whether it's just been visiting with other drunks. We are taught things in sobriety that are totally different from things that were taught out there, mm-hmm. out in the world, such as never ask for help. You know, that's what society had taught me. Mm-hmm. That's what our culture had taught me. You have to be self-sufficient, and asking for help is a sign of weakness, and don't ever let them see that. And that's, what led to my whatever happened, my downfall, or where things got totally unmanageable because I wouldn't ask for help.
And you think you have to manage
it yourself. And now in sobriety, I'm told, you do that. People are meant to ask for help.
Yeah.
That's an acceptable thing to do.
Yeah.
That's what I've been taught. So that's how I got back in. I did. I asked for help. I said, I went to the other judges and said, you got to help me out and get me caught up. Or I had such a backlog of cases, and I asked for help, and they pitched in, and that was one of the things that was one of the burdens that was lifted.
Yeah.
Because my colleagues stepped up. Yeah, and you learn that you got to surrender. Mm-hmm. Man, our culture doesn't teach surrender.
No.
No. Absolutely no.
Yeah.
You don't ever surrender. But I had to. That's how I found my way out. And never ask for help. It's like the culture of society, I'm not quite sure how to frame it, but they had lied to me mm-hmm. about the rules. Yeah. They had lied to me about the rules. And I've learned in sobriety that some of those rules are wrong. And oh, man, life is so much better, Jason. Mm-hmm. So much better when I know I can ask for help anytime I want to.
Yeah. There's a lot of freedom.
I know I can make mistakes. Yeah.
That's a power in itself,
it's just so freeing.
Yeah. To have the freedom to make a mistake. And I see this with kids, and you have grandkids, and I have grandkids that are about the same age. And I watch them sometimes, and it feels like we're still teaching kids to not make mistakes in a lot of ways, or they carry this idea that they can't make a mistake, or if they're not going to be good at something, they shouldn't even try it. And I think it's so important to try to make sure people know that there's a lot of freedom in making mistakes, and there's a lot of freedom in trying things that you don't know how to do, and then learning in the process about how to do something.
I was telling some friends just this weekend, I don't know what, but anyway, that there are things that I regret not doing because I might fail.
Mm-hmm.
I said, I'd really like to do this, but I might fail.
Yeah.
And that shouldn't be a reason not to do it.
Yeah.
I mean, do it.
Yeah, do it.
Do it.
They're probably...
And failure is okay.
Yeah.
The way I grew up,
Yeah.
man, no failure. That's not an option.
Yeah.
Speaking of options, like I struggle with acceptance. That's one of the things sobriety has taught me, is just when you're in circumstances that are very troubling, or that you got to accept it for what it is. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's like we think acceptance is an option.
Yeah.
No, you got to accept it. This whole thing about, okay, I'll talk about the serenity prayer.
Mm-hmm.
I want the wisdom. I want the wisdom to recognize the things I can change, and the courage to change them, and the things I can't change.
Yeah.
And I need to be able to tell the difference between those two things.
Yeah.
And almost always, it's, the problem when I'm in this, I don't know how to phrase it. When I'm in this thing I don't like, I said, man, I hate this. I hate this. I hate this. The problem's me. Yeah. It's not. There's a phrase I love, and it is, it ain't them.
Yeah.
It ain't them.
Yeah.
It's me.
You had told me that if you were going to get tattoos related to your sobriety, you'd get one on one arm and one on the other. And yes. One was, it's time for crafts.
Yes.
And the other was, it ain't them.
Those are the things I got to remember.
Yeah.
I've got to keep that in front of me. And, it's like in sobriety, to me, it feels like this journey has now become a float trip. Mm-hmm. I thought the journey through life should be a whitewater rafting. But no, it's supposed to be a float trip.
Yeah.
And you just go with the current.
Yeah.
I mean, it's good. Maybe it's because of my age. I don't know. But I think it's more acceptance of the world around me and a lot of things I can't change. So.
Yeah. Which I still struggle with. I still think there are things that when I look at it, I know I can't change them, but I'll still, like you said, I hate this situation, and I want to change it. I could use a little more measure of accepting that I can't. There are a lot of things most things you can't change. Most things you can't.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. You just have to accept them. I wanted to
talk. What I can't change is me.
Exactly. I can
change me.
Yeah.
I've got the power to do that. But yeah, there's big issues that you and I are very passionate about.
Yeah.
That we have very little control over. And I don't think I'm suggesting that we give up on those.
No. I don't, talking about some of this, it reminds me, I don't know if you remember this or not, but when I first came to the legislature and we were talking and you had said something to me, and I think it was just part of a conversation, but it always stuck with me. You had told me that the job was of being in the legislature, the job was big, but that the person wasn't. That you would, and now that I see this context of the humility and the ego and keeping those things in balance, I remember that you had said to me, well, I'm not big. What Steve Becker is not big. The job I'm doing is big, but the job is bigger than me. And that has always been something that I've always tried to remember, because it struck me when you said it, and it always stuck in my mind that to remember that we do things in this life. If we're lucky, we do things in this life that are big, but it doesn't mean we're big. It doesn't mean we're any bigger than anyone else in the world. It just means we happen to have a job in which some of those things are big.
Yeah. That we're put in a position where we might be able to contribute.
Yeah. You touched a little bit earlier on kind of the darkness and the shame of addiction and alcoholism. And I really want to explore that a little bit, because I think this is a part of addiction that people don't really understand fully. Can you talk about how that plays out, how it affects your decisions? I mean, we talked a little bit about shame is the sort of thing that keeps you from asking for help, keeps you from being open about your drinking, hiding your drinking. All those things are related to shame, right?
Absolutely. And I think I found myself in a spot where I lived in that. It's kind of like living in a dark, dank storm shelter or something like that, root cellar or something like that, where it stinks and it's uncomfortable and it's dark and it's bad. It's bad. But it's familiar.
Mm-hmm.
You look up the steps out of there and see the sunlight, and you think, I'm not sure. I know how this is familiar to me.
Mm-hmm.
This dark, dank cellar is familiar to me. I don't know that I know how to live out there in the sunshine.
Yeah.
And even though you hate where you are, you're familiar with it.
Yeah.
And you're scared to get out of it. God, that was ugly. It's like, man, I got to learn to live out there with the other people.
Yeah. And eventually, and without alcohol, which, going back to the beginning, was this social lubricant that made it okay.
Okay, my closest friend. Alcohol became so important to me, it determined who my friends were.
Yeah.
It determined where I went out for dinner.
Yeah.
It determined everything.
Yeah.
Everything. My only friends were people who drank like I did.
Yeah.
It became my whole damn world.
Yeah.
And if I walk out there in that sunlight, I'm going to have to live with that. I'm going to have to live in the real world without alcohol, and I don't know that I can.
Yeah. And it may mean new friends, and it may mean new habits, and
absolutely.
Yeah. And that's a lot that's a lot to try to process, right? A lot
and I can't do it by myself.
Yeah.
That was the big thing.
Yeah.
That's why there was outpatient. That's why I kept going. I needed support. I needed some support.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you did find that. Right?
I did.
Yeah.
It's out there.
Yeah.
It's out there. There's a lot of support out there. Absolutely.
So how?
And let me say this,
yeah.
Jason. My life now is better than I ever could have written. If I would have accepted the task of writing the script for my life, the best I could imagine, my life now would exceed that.
Yeah.
When I was drinking and going through all that stuff, I didn't know that a life this good could be lived. I didn't know it existed. God, I love it. I love sobriety, man.
Yeah. So how many years are you sober now?
No, I've been able to put a few 24 hours together. Let's put it that way. I don't like to say how long I've been sober, because it's like I'd be proud of it.
Yeah.
I don't want to take pride in anything.
Yeah. And so it still is just one day at a time.
We're recording this like at midday, and I can say I haven't had a drink yet today.
Yeah.
I don't think I will this afternoon. Tomorrow I'll take on tomorrow.
Yeah.
I don't like to talk about how long I've been sober, other than just saying I'm sober today.
Yeah. That's good.
And I'm so grateful for the sobriety I've experienced, but it's still, if I look at it like I can never have another drink the rest of my life, oh man, that sounds overwhelming.
Yeah.
But I can do today.
Yeah.
I can do today.
Yeah. Yeah. You sometimes talk about the inpatient and some of the things that happened there. The other day when we were talking, you described it as the first step to the journey of being a better person. And that struck me when you said that too, that it's, just like you can pinpoint when it started, when the alcoholism started, it's almost that you could pinpoint when it turned back the other way. And when you talk about this being a story, and you talk about your journey, I really like that you can identify this moment and say, this is the moment.
I do too. I'm grateful that I can identify a moment when in this journey, when that journey started, or when my life took a turn. Yeah, and I am a better person than I was when I was drinking.
Mm-hmm.
And I hope I would like to be a better person tomorrow than I am today. I want to be a good person.
Yeah.
And I want to get rid of my flaws, my obstacles to becoming a better person. I'm still working on that.
Yeah.
I'm still working on that.
What would you say or what advice would you have? How old are you now? Can I ask that?
I'm 76 years old.
Okay. What would you say, and you've kind of hit on a couple of things that really stand out to me, but to somebody who's younger, somebody who's maybe in a similar place where you were in your 30s, early 40s, What would you say to that person as the man you are today to someone who's maybe at the place you were those years ago?
I would say that when you're in the throes of that alcoholic depression, that depression lies. What your mind is telling you is a lie. It's not true, man. I reached a point where I thought it would be a charitable act to just check out, because the world would be a better place if I wasn't in it. Mm-hmm. That's the point that I reached. And that was a lie. That's not true. And that's what I would tell people. The things your head's telling you aren't true. And you've got to reach out. You've got to grab a lifeline before you take that ultimate step. Yeah. And that's, God. Yeah, there's angels out there ready to help you. And man, once you get out of it, it's absolutely wonderful.
Yeah.
Wonderful. So yeah, I think that's the big thing, is don't believe that. And that's so hard to do. I mean, your head's telling you what it's telling you, but that's not true. That's not true.
And I think if you live in your head and you stay in your head and you're in the cellar and you're not going out into the sunlight to live world out there, you're more likely to believe what your mind is telling you.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, your mind's going to tell you can't live out there.
Yeah. You know, it breaks my heart, really, to hear that there was a point in your life that you felt that way, that you felt like you should just check out. Because the time I've known you, you've been sober since I've known you. And I've always respected and admired you so much. And I'm going to try to stroke your ego, but you have. You have been to me an example of somebody who can adapt and change and learn. You've always been humble. You've been helpful to me. And so for me to hear that from you it breaks my heart a little bit.
I was so selfish. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for those words.
You've had a lot of different, aside from your career, time in the legislature, you have had a lot of different interests and hobbies and projects over the years. I know you recently sold the bunkhouse out at Medora.
Becker's bunkhouse.
Yep. You want to talk about that and kind of what you're working on now and what you're involved in these days?
Yeah, Becker's bunkhouse was my hobby shop, I guess. A business that was just based on my hobby. And that was collecting Old West memorabilia, cowboy collectibles and stuff. And so I had that retail store, cowboy antique store, for 20 years and had a lot of fun with it. And I think that part of it, when I started that project, I really wanted this. The building I was in was a historic building. It's on the National Register of Historic Places. And it's an old hotel, and it would have lent itself so well to either a little cowboy bar or a little diner, lunch type place or something. That's what I really wanted to do with it. I didn't do that. because I thought I might fail.
Yeah.
I never developed it like I wanted to because I was afraid I would fail. That's one of my regrets. But I enjoyed having the store there. But it ran its course, and I'm okay now. I mean, I'm okay without it. Currently, I guess my issues are big picture issues. I've been reading a lot about our country's history of racism. I've been reading a lot about overreaction by law enforcement officers that gets in the news a lot, and all the legal aspects of that. I've been reading about the law regarding force that is unconstitutional, violation of rights by law enforcement. So that's one of my passions. Racism is one of my passions. I feel so strongly about that, Jason, but there's something that I don't know that I can do anything about. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's so ingrained in our society. And then there's this push to not address it. I mean, God, let's not even talk about it. In fact, let's do this. Let's pass a law that says you can't talk about race. Mm-hmm. And that way, we won't have to acknowledge it.
Yeah.
That way, we won't have to, acknowledge that that's the birth of our nation.
And what you've found in some of your reading is that racism is a much more integrated part of our economic systems and our political systems than we historically have ever acknowledged.
Oh my goodness, it's inequality based on race exists in our criminal justice system. It exists in our delivery of health, in our health systems, how we deliver health to people. Mm-hmm. There's inequalities of those of color and as to compare to those of white. It's in our economy. It creates this class difference where, the history of our country is that white Europeans have generational wealth. Mm-hmm. Black Americans come from slavery. Yeah. They come where they had nothing. They come from where their ancestors were property. I can't get past that.
Yeah.
And the Supreme Court ruled at one point that a black person was 3/5 of a person.
Yeah.
That was the law of the country.
Mm-hmm.
How did we do that? And how can we not address that?
Yeah.
But we don't. We make it. I mean, like I said, there's a push to pass laws that you can't talk about it. Mm-hmm. Certainly can't talk about it in school.
Yeah. No, that's happened. A lot of the southern states are doing that right now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's remarkable.
And people say that we've elected a black president, so obviously there's no racial inequality in this country. No, that didn't change anything.
Yeah.
That didn't change anything. I was serving in the legislature, which meant I was probably, I don't know how old, but old. Before, it was then that I learned about the Tulsa race riots. Mm-hmm. That was a horrible incident. That's what occurred 3 hours away.
Yeah.
Less than 3 hours away.
Yeah.
Horrible, horrible thing in our nation's history. And I was an old man before I ever heard about it.
Yeah. And before that, the effort had been to bury that, to just pretend it didn't happen.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. There's another passion that you have is kind of related to this, and you do a podcast on it. Do you want to talk about this?
I'd love to talk about that. Thank you.
And it's a good podcast. Let's talk about this.
Thank you. Thank you. It stems from my serving as a district judge for 26 years. I'd learned how imperfect our criminal justice system is. And I am vocally, very vocal about my opposition to the death penalty, mainly because we don't require the only absolute certainty in our criminal justice system is an execution. I mean, the guy's absolutely certainly dead.
Yeah.
But nothing else in our criminal justice system do we require absolute certainty.
Yeah.
We don't require it with guilt or to finding someone guilty. The test is beyond a reasonable doubt.
Yeah.
That's not absolute certainty.
No.
In fact, you can't tell the jury you must be absolute certain in your verdict. No, you'll get scolded by the judge. The prosecutor will be objecting and saying that's not the law. That's not the law.
Yeah.
You don't have to be absolutely certain. So how can we impose the absolute certainty of death when we don't require the absolute certainty of guilt?
Yeah.
And that carries me when we don't require the absolute certainty of guilt means we have wrongful convictions. And there are a lot of people in our, as everybody knows, we incarcerate more than any other civilized nation on this globe, more per capita. I think our population in prisons and jails is 2.3 million. And there are a lot of wrongfully convicted inmates serving sentences for crimes they didn't commit. That's what I'm passionate about, and I want to bring awareness to that. Thus, the podcast. The podcast was my daughter's idea.
You and Beth do this together.
Yeah, and my wife has joined us.
Okay, yeah.
It's a family thing, man.
That's good. And
father, mother, daughter.
Oh, that's great.
It is.
Yeah. And so you've done some of these, and it's called Cleared. Okay.
Cleared.
And you've done a number of these, but you do a pretty thorough retelling of the case and the circumstances of the conviction, and then move through the evidence that changed that conviction. And some cases you've gotten to talk with the people after their record has been cleared and they were released, and talk to them a little bit about the effect of that, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, we research the cases the best we can and tell the story. But some of these guys have served a lot of time. Earlier this month, there were 2 exonerations of people that were sentenced to death. That makes my skin crawl.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, one more statistic. Since 1973, I think it is, there have been 195 exonerees of death row, which means that but for these exonerations, since 1975, every 3 months, an innocent person would have been executed.
Yeah.
for 50 years.
Yeah.
Over a 50-year period. Every 3 months, we would have executed an innocent person. But for these exonerations, that blows my mind. But anyway, earlier this month, there were 2 exonerated and that had been sentenced to death, and one of them had served over 50 years.
Wow.
He went to prison at the age of 18. And he comes out and meets his grown grandchildren.
Yeah.
Wow, man.
And that's a sort of death in its own way too, right? Like all the potential of that person's life is lost.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Now they have to start at this, later age, different circumstances. Probably the world has changed in a lot of ways. They're not sure how to navigate.
Oh, you think it's changed over the last 50 years?
A little bit. But that's hard. That's hard for somebody getting out of prison who's been in an institution for 50 years to come out and adapt to that.
Oh, the change on everything. No one telling you when to do something. No one telling you it's time for lunch.
Yeah.
No one telling you now's when you go to bed.
Yeah.
Yeah. I can't imagine. I can't imagine. And the ones that we've been able to connect with, we have an exoneree that lives here locally that I've developed a friendship with. I've met other exonerees, and it surprises me that they aren't bitter. We did one profile on our podcast where after this guy's release, the bitterness of the whole experience just ate him up, and he did not live a good life. And I'm thinking, oh, God, that would be me.
Yeah.
I'd come out so upset.
Yeah.
I guess. I don't know. But
it would be hard to be gracious.
I admire these guys that they're not bitter.
Yeah. I think like you. I think if I didn't commit a crime and I'd spent most of my life behind bars, and I missed, and you get one life, and that's what happened to you.
Yeah.
I would have a hard time.
That's how you spent your life.
Yeah.
For something you didn't do.
Yeah.
So yeah, the podcast is good. We have fun with it, and we've interviewed some wonderful people that help with exonerations. We've interviewed attorneys that have gotten their clients exonerated, and I guess because of my career, the imperfections of the criminal justice system is something that I'm passionate about.
And it feels like that's something, based on all of this is something that you so experienced firsthand, knowing that you and you had to come to a place where you knew you weren't perfect all the time. You were making decisions about people's lives and knowing that there was a chance you were making mistakes.
Yes, and I confess that when I would leave the courtroom after a difficult decision, I had just made a decision that it was very difficult for me to arrive at that point, but I had to decide one way or the other. You can't be a judge and say, no, I'm not going to.
Yeah.
I give up. I don't know.
Yeah.
That's not an option.
Beats me.
Yeah. Beats me. But as I leave the court, I confess that as I leave the courtroom, sometimes I would pray, God, I hope I got that right.
Yeah.
That's as good as it got.
Yeah.
Is, God, I hope I'm right.
Yeah.
Jeez.
Yeah. That's a lot of imperfection in a system like that.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people doing their best, a lot of people trying
That's right.
to do everything they can, but systems are by their nature imperfect, and people in them are imperfect, so there's going to be errors. But then on top of that, there are system problems, like you're talking about, like the basis of racism in our country and things like that, that then bake into systems biases and habits that at this point in time have become the water we swim in. We don't even know that they're wrong because they've been a part of the system for so long.
Yeah, I think that's why a lot of people believe that in looking at our culture as a whole, they believe that black people are treated equally.
Mm-hmm.
They're not.
Yeah.
In these systems, they're not.
Yeah.
In the criminal justice system, in the economic system, they're not.
Yeah. And in a lot of ways we don't see it because it's just been truth for so long.
Yeah.
That it feels like when people are saying this is what's happening and this is the real truth, if that feels like somebody's trying to, I think to a lot of people, it feels like somebody's lying to you because this thing that you knew to be true, somebody else is saying it's not true. And I think that's part of why it's been so hard for people to understand. But as we talked about in sobriety and all of this and this journey, the first step is acknowledging that you've got to change things, that there's a problem, and that you have to make an active choice about whether to continue in the cellar, which is familiar and comfortable, but unpleasant, or whether you're going to venture out into a new space with new people and new ideas. The same concept applies, right? We have to be willing to make a change in the adjustment and move away from the familiar.
Oftentimes we hear the phrase, we have to step outside our comfort zone.
Yeah.
That's what we're talking about. We're talking about leaving home once in a while.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Going out and seeing what else is out there.
Going out and seeing what else is going on.
Yeah.
Because things can get pretty comfortable in Hutchinson, Kansas.
They can. And they can get pretty comfortable. And if you don't want to see any further than that, then you don't have to. And I think that happens over and over and over in communities throughout the country, everywhere. Well, I've had you here for, it looks like about an hour and a half now. We've talked for about an hour and a half.
Holy moly.
It's a good, we could talk for longer too, but
you and I could,
yes,
you know, you and I could.
We have a lot of good conversations over the years. I think about that. I met you back when I was a young reporter at the Hutchinson News, and you know, a lot of people were kind of standoffish and when a reporter come around asking questions, but you were always open to answering my questions. And yeah, I always appreciated that. And then we became friends.
I think before you, it was Bill Wilson covered the courts.
Yeah.
And we got to be friends. It used to be that the Hutchinson News had a reporter assigned to the courthouse.
Yep.
And that reporter would be in my court every day, every morning, when I would do first appearances of people who had been arrested, the previous day. I'd have a court reporter in there.
Yep.
And my name would get in the paper almost every day because I was all that.
Yeah.
I was, man.
Then it would say Judge Steve Becker. did this.
God.
Sometimes it would be in there because the Court of Appeals would say that you did it wrong.
They didn't get any of that right. Yeah, my wife told me not too long ago, she reminded me that I had a career where nobody told me no.
Mm-hmm.
I was never told no. Wow.
Yeah.
Man, I took that ball and ran with it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's it. Yeah. Never being told no is a kind of dangerous thing.
It is.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, some of my decisions got reversed by the appellate courts.
Yeah.
No big deal.
Yeah. But in the courtroom, you were the final word.
In that little courtroom I had, that was it.
Yeah. You were the authority. The authority.
Yeah.
Nobody could say that you were wrong or challenge you or
Nope.
Yeah. Without saying, as that gal that came to tell you it was time to do crafts was so woefully didn't know that she was supposed to address you with Your Honor. It's time.
With all due respect.
With all due respect, Your Honor.
With all due respect, Your Honor, you're full of crap. You always got to preface it. With all due respect, Your Honor.
Well, thanks for coming on today. Thanks for hanging out with me.
Oh, I love hanging out with you, buddy.
I do. I love it. Yeah.
I treasure our friendship.
Same for me. I appreciate it. You've been a big part and a good part of my life, and I'm very thankful for that.
Thank you.
All right. I'd like to thank a few of the people who've helped make That Podcast and Hutch possible. My son Mitchell Probst wrote and recorded the music for the show. Jenny Brigette put together some great graphics and promotional art. And Chris Acker helps overcome my mistakes to produce a great sounding product every episode. That Podcast and Hutch is made possible through a collaboration between the Hutchison Arts and Culture Collective and Salt City Sound. They're working to bring resources and infrastructure to support art, music, and storytelling in our community. If you have an idea for your own podcast, reach out to them at podcasts@saltcitysound.net. If you enjoy That Podcast and Hutch, be sure to subscribe and share it with all your friends. You can also help support this production by subscribing to thatguyandhutch.substack.com or by emailing me at thatguyandhutch@gmail.com to learn about sponsorship opportunities. Thanks for listening, and I hope you'll join us again next week.
A Salt City Sound production.